who was killed in action in Korea. I had a brother who served in Nam. And I had a husband who served in the streets of America.
We are trapped in a vicious cycle of poverty, of ignorance, of apathy, of disease, and of death. And they have these old Uncle Tom Negro leaders coming to Harlem telling you and me that times are getting better. Your times will never get better until you make them better.
Whereas you preach one thing and practice another thing. You say that this is a land of equality and 20 million of your black citizens, so-called citizens, don't have equality. You say that this is the land of freedom and 20 million black people here don't have freedom. You say that this is the land of justice and 20 million black people here don't have justice. And the government, from the Supreme Court, the Senate and the Congress and the President on up or down, is not able in combined to bring about any change in the attitude of white America toward black America.
My first inoculation was Dr. King. And then that led me to Adam Powell and a lot of other people. But I was put off by Malcolm X.
Why?
Because what he was saying and the way he was saying it was too blunt. It was dangerous. And you didn't say those things in those days. I told you, we had been socialized as kids to get around wrong, not to confront it. And Malcolm spoke in very declarative terms, and he said some terrible things about white people that we thought, but you would never express it, you see. He talked about the way this country was not a democracy but a hypocrisy, and he talked about what had been happening to us down south and up south. And he was not shy. He had and he was very, very intimidating. I'm man enough to admit it. To a lot of people who are my age who will speak, you know, with love about Malcolm as though it had always been that way. But that's not so. He scared a lot of us to death.
Then you're afraid to bleed. I said you're afraid to bleed. As long as the white man sent you to Korea, you bled. He sent you to Germany, you bled. He sent you to the South Pacific to fight the Japanese, you bled. You bleed for white people. But when it comes time to seeing your own churches being bombed and little black girls murdered, you haven't got no blood.
I was amazed at his capacity to communicate and at the naked honesty with which he expressed his feelings about black people, about white people. He scared me. I'm sure he intended to. But certainly after I saw him and the hate that hate produced, I knew that I would never forget this man.
When I first saw Malcolm on the television, he scared me also. Immediately the family said, turn off that television. That man is saying stuff you ain't supposed to hear.
I'm not intending to try and stir you up and make you do something that you wouldn't have done anyway. I pray that God will bless you in everything that you do. I pray that you will grow intellectually so that you can understand the problems of the world and where you fit into in that world picture. And I pray that all the fear that has ever been in your heart will be taken out. And when you look at that man, if you know he's nothing but a coward, you won't fear him. If he wasn't a coward, he wouldn't gang up on you. He wouldn't need to sneak around here. This is how they function. They function in mobs. That's a coward. They put on a sheet so you won't know who they are. That's a coward. No. The time will come when that sheet will be ripped off. If the federal government doesn't take it off, we'll take it off.
It is the only movement in the country which we can call grassroots. I hate to say that, but it's true. Because it is only, when Malcolm talks, or one of the ministers talk, they articulate for all the Negro people who hear them, who listen to them, they articulate their suffering. The suffering which has been in this country so long denied. That's Malcolm's great authority over any of his audiences. He corroborates their reality. He tells them that they really exist.
Who taught you, please, who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate, you should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you?
And in those early days in Miami, just before you were training, when you were training there, that was when you met, would you say, one of the most important people in your life, Malcolm X? Was he one of the most important people in your life?
Yeah, I went to Missouri Mars to hear him preach. He said, why we call Negroes Chinese and after China, Germans after Germany, Russians after Russia, Cubans after Cuba, all people named after country. What country called Negroes? I said, I don't know. He said, we don't have a name. If I say, here comes Ching Chong, and here comes Mr. Ching Chong, it's Chinese. Here comes Mr. Lumumba, look for Africa. Here comes White Clown, Indian. Here comes Weinstein, Jew. Here comes Washington, a green. You don't know what color he is. We don't have our names. We were named after white people. Cassius Clay was a white man. The Negroes were named after white people. They don't have the names. They still don't have the names. Another black man named George Washington. So, I heard that. I said, that makes sense. I can hear more. And I just stayed there till I found joined up.
Who are you? You don't know? Don't tell me Negro, that's nothing. What were you before the white man named you a Negro? And where were you? And what did you have? What was yours? What language did you speak then? What was your name? It couldn't have been Smith or Jones or Bunch or Powell. That wasn't your name. They don't have those kind of names where you and I came from. No, what was your name? And why don't you now know what your name was then? Where did it go? Where did you lose it? Who took it? And how did he take it? What tongue did you speak? How did the man take your tongue? Where is your history? How did the man wipe out your history? How did the man, what did the man do to make you as dumb as you are right now?
Malcolm X, I want to talk with you briefly about your affiliation with Cassius. How long have you known him?
About 3 years.
And have you been advising him as far as his religious affiliations are concerned?
Well, no, I don't give advice to anyone. He's my brother and my friend. I express what I know and understand around him, but he has a mind of his own and understanding of his own.
The power structure had successfully created the image of the American Negro as someone with no confidence, no militancy, and they had done this by giving him images of heroes that weren't truly militant or confident. And now here come Cassius, the exact contrast of everything that was representative of the Negro image. He said he was the greatest. All of the odds were against him. He upset the odds makers. He won. He became victorious. He became the champ. They knew that as soon as, if people began to identify with Cassius and the type of image he was creating, they were going to have trouble out of these Negroes, because they'd have Negroes walking around the street saying, I'm the greatest.
And you really liked Malcolm X, did you?
I loved him.
Malcolm X was a very threatening symbol to American society, particularly to white American society and to middle-class black American society as well. I think now Malcolm X is more of an acceptable figure for many reasons, not the least of which is that people want sort of to defang him at this point and to make him acceptable.
Well, see, that's where I don't think the Malcolm X that they want is more acceptable. The real Malcolm X, who was planning on taking the United States government before the UN up until the day he died, the real Malcolm X is still not acceptable to this country. It is only what they're trying to do is what they do is pull out. I think there are two kinds of people who basically talk about the big change in Malcolm X. Those of us who were involved with him said that the big change in Malcolm X was when he went from being Big Red to being Malcolm X, not when he went from being, the post-Mecca and pre-Mecca, all that St. Paul, type of attitude that many people have about that. Malcolm X, the Malcolm X that I knew, this is still very unacceptable to this country. If I got out there right now and started speaking the real Malcolm X to people, it would be just as unacceptable now as it was then. And those of us who were involved with him, he probably will remain unacceptable because we are not going to allow them to what we call deball him, which is what they did to the real Martin Luther King. The real Martin Luther King is now Martin Luther, I Have a Dream King. The man who disrupted whole cities, who became the dominant force in the war against Vietnam, no longer hardly exists about Martin Luther King. But we're not going to allow that to happen to Malcolm X. And so I don't think Malcolm X is acceptable at all. I think that they pull out one part of him, the self-help thing, which some black people try to claim began with the so-called black conservatives, which has been a part of black history for several hundred years. They pull that out, and that becomes what they talk about. But I am sure that, for instance, Clarence Thomas would not be supporting the Malcolm X who, up until he died, had very definite plans on taking this country before the United Nations for violating the human rights of black people. That's the Malcolm X that was assassinated on February 21st, 1965.
We feel that the problem, number one, of the black man in America is beyond America's ability to solve. It's a human problem, not an American problem or a Negro problem. And as a human problem or a world problem, we feel that it should be taken out of the jurisdiction of the United States government and the United States courts and taken into the United Nations in the same manner that the problems of the black man in South Africa, Angola, and other parts of the world, and even the way they're trying to bring the problems of the Jews in Russia into the United Nations because of violation of human rights. We believe that our problem is one not of violation of civil rights, but a violation of human rights. Not only are we denied the right to be a citizen in the United States, we're denied the right to be a human being.
He had gotten the pledge of 8 African nations to take the case of black America before the United Nations as a human rights case as against a civil rights case. And I do not think this nation wanted to suffer the embarrassment of having that done. He was exposing colonialism.
Are you prepared to go into the United Nations at this point and ask that charges be brought against the United States for its treatment of American Negroes?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, please. I think you're right in my camera. The audience will have to be quiet. Yes, as I pointed out when I was during my traveling, that nations African nations and Asian nations and Latin American nations look very hypocritical when they stand up in the United Nations condemning the racist practices of South Africa and that which is practiced by Portugal and Angola, and saying nothing in the UN about the racist practices that are manifest every day against Negroes in this society. Even in South Africa, those Africans aren't faced with bayonets and aren't faced with police dogs. I would be not a man. If I was in a position to bring it in front of the United Nations and didn't do so, I wouldn't be a man.
Jim, nearly 30 years ago, you said you thought it would take maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, and you could go fishing. When I remind you of that,
Wyatt is right. I'll go fishing in the next life now.
Yeah, both of us were more optimistic about the possibility of change in American society than we needed to be. And I confess in this redo that Malcolm was more accurate about an assessment of where America was on race than we were at that point in time.
One white man named Lincoln
supposedly fought the Civil War to solve the race problem, and the problem is still here. Another white man named Lincoln, again the same white man, issued the Emancipation Proclamation to solve the race problem, and the problem is still here. Some more white liberals came along with the 13th, 14th, and 5th Amendments, which were supposed to solve the race problem. The problem is still here. 9 years ago, 9 more white liberals, so-called, came up with what they call a Supreme Court desegregation decision, and the problem is still here. And then another white man named Kennedy came along running for president and told Negroes what all he was going to do for them if they voted for him, and they voted for him 80%. He's been in office now for 3 years, and the problem is still here. When police dogs were biting black women and black children and black babies in Birmingham, Alabama, that Kennedy talked about what he couldn't do because no federal law had been violated. And as soon as the Negroes exploded and began to protect themselves and got the best of the crackers in Birmingham, then Kennedy sent for the troops. And there was no, he didn't have any new law when he sent for the troops when the Negroes erupted than he had at the time when whites were erupting. So we are within our rights and with justice, with justification, when we express doubt concerning the ability of the white man to solve our problem, and also when we express doubt concerning his integrity, concerning his sincerity. Because you will have to confess that the problem has been around here for a long time, and whites have been saying the same thing about it for the past 100 years, and there's no nearer a solution today than there was 100 years ago.
To the Malcolm question right quick, then I yield to Dr. West. I think the question is how Malcolm fits in. For me, it's back to what I said earlier about challenging folks to re-examine their assumptions and to expand their inventory of ideas. If Malcolm did anything for us, he challenged us to re-examine our assumptions, to expand our inventory of ideas. In many ways, this is going to be a dangerous thing to say, but I'm going to say it right quick and back away from the podium. In many ways, Malcolm, although I think King is perhaps the greatest American we've ever produced, I'm willing to admit to you that in many ways, Malcolm was more free and more courageous than King. And that's how I think Malcolm fits into this conversation.
Mr. Malcolm, thank you very much. You're welcome, sir. I thank you for letting the people over in Europe know what the white man in this country is doing to black people and the hypocrisy he's practicing when he accuses them over there of not getting their house in order. 20 million black people in this country have been just as thoroughly colonized by the American white man in a more shrewd, modern way than all of the colonized people in Angola, South Africa, or any other part of this world. But the white man over here hides his own dirt by constantly pointing toward Britain and France and Portugal and these other countries and accusing them of being colonial powers when he mastered colonialism before those countries ever knew what it was. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Brother Tavis said he's the most courageous. I can understand Tavis saying it at the level of Malcolm being willing to speak shattering fundamental truths that no black leader was willing to say in the American public, in the white mainstream, on the Johnny Carson show and so forth. No one had ever done that before, even though a lot of black folk have said it in barbershops and beauty salons. But that's different than saying it to the white mainstream. When he looks in Johnny Carson's eyes, Johnny Carson asks him, what does a Negro really want? Do you remember what Malcolm said? Looked at him and looked dead in his eyes. Johnny, I'm the man you think you are. What do you want? Do you want your children to grow up safe? Do you want your family to have security? Do you want health care? Do you want a job with a living wage? Do you want self-determination? Yes. Then that's what the Negro wants. We'll go to a commercial, please. It's 1963, 64.
Referring to President Kennedy, I believe you call him a trickster?
He has to be a trickster. Even if he's the president, that doesn't stop him from being a trickster if he's making tricks. Anytime a man running for president tells Negroes what he's going to do for them when he gets in office, and after he gets in office, he has time to do something for everybody else except the people that put him in office, he tricked the people who put him in office. He has the time to take a stand against U.S. Steel, against Castro, against Khrushchev, against Laos and South Vietnam and all these other places all over the world. But when it comes to time to correcting the injustices that are being inflicted against Negroes in this country, Kennedy sits up there like Nero. He's fiddling while Birmingham is burning.
He was important because he was what the Temi people in West Africa call a truth teller. That they say every 1,000 moons one is born, and they tell the truth regardless of the costs. And he told the black people of America the truth about themselves in an unvarnished, ruthless, eloquent manner. He analyzed the situation of the dispossessed blacks. And that analysis is still a valid one. That's why, you know, the memory of him lives the way it does.
How could so few? The white man today will tell you that thousands of years ago, the black man in Africa was living in palaces. The black man in Africa was wearing silk. The black man in Africa was cooking and seasoning his food. The black man in Africa had mastered the arts and the sciences. He knew the course of the stars in the universe before the man up in Europe knew that the earth wasn't flat. Is that right or wrong? Then if the black man in Africa had reached such a high state of civilization so long ago, at a time when the people of Europe were crawling on their all fours, what happened to make these people or enable these people to come out of the cave and come down into our civilization and take it over and hitch us to the plow? What happened? How did they do it? These are the things you should want to find out before you say hooray, hooray, hooray. Is that right or wrong?
Both men, I knew Malcolm much better than Dr. King. But Malcolm was a faithful man, great loving person who really loved black people. And then one of the most courageous persons I've ever known. Courage is the most important of all the virtues, because without courage you can't practice any other virtue consistently. You can't be consistently kind, consistently fair, merciful, just, loving. You cannot. Malcolm, having said that all whites were blue-eyed devils, all this whites are that, he went to Mecca and he came to West Africa and he said, I have met white-skinned, blue-eyed men who I openly call brother. I was wrong. Now, it takes a great deal of courage to say that, even when the person feels that they were wrong. I see this today. People who don't believe what they say, but because they have the habit of saying it.
And this is what I had to become aware of on my pilgrimage to Mecca. I could see then that there are many white people in this country who will side with the Negro in whatever he has to do to protect himself.
But that's a considerable change of opinion in Malcolm X.
No, today I'm speaking for myself. Formerly I spoke for Elijah Muhammad. And everything I said was, Elijah Muhammad teaches us thus and so. I'm speaking now from what I think, from what I have seen, from what I have analyzed, and the conclusions that I have reached.
Then the white man is no longer the devil, and he is no longer bound to be evil?
If I judge a man by his conscious behavior, I am not a racist. I don't subscribe to any of the tenets of racism.
Then there are good whites and good blacks and bad whites and blacks.
It's not a case of being good and bad, good or bad blacks and whites. It's a case of being good or bad human beings.
And as far as this apartheid charge that he attributed to me is concerned, evidently he has been misinformed. I don't believe in any form of apartheid. I don't believe in any form of segregation. I don't believe in any form of racialism. But at the same time, I don't endorse a person as being right just because his skin is white. And oftentimes when you find people like this, I mean that type, when a man whom they have been taught is below them has the nerve or firmness to question some of their philosophy or some of their conclusions, usually they put that label on us, a label that is only designed to project an image which the public will find distasteful. I'm a Muslim. If there is something wrong with that, then I stand condemned. My religion is Islam. I believe in Allah. I believe in Muhammad as the apostle of Allah. I believe in brotherhood of all men. But I don't believe in brotherhood with anybody who's not ready to practice brotherhood with our people. I don't believe in brotherhood.
He was a man of strength, if nothing else. Regardless of the politics or how you feel about anything, you certainly have to respect him for being a man of conviction and strength.
brave man, very brave man. When you think of the time that he lived in, very brave man, man among men.
Misunderstood man?
Probably, yeah.
A man taken out of context in some cases by the press?
Oh, probably, yeah.
I mean, I was taught, I'm from the deep South, that this man was preaching hate, but when I told Spike and I told the others that when I see the film, I don't get that impression. I didn't hear the hate that everyone else says he was doing. Was I not listening correctly, or?
Well, you know, he would illustrate it this way. Is the sheep preaching hate when he says, I'm not going to let the wolf eat me anymore? If the wolf comes in here, next time he comes in here, I'll do whatever I have to do to keep him off my back. Is the sheep violent or is the wolf the violent one? He wasn't teaching hate, he was teaching common sense. You know, somebody's knocking you over the head, stop them. Do whatever you have to do to stop them. You know, the ones that were knocking him over the head were afraid of the fact that he might swing back, so they said, now he's teaching hate, he's violent.
I don't think when a man is being criminally treated, that some criminal has the right to tell that man what tactics to use to get the criminal off his back. When a criminal starts misusing me, I am going to use whatever necessary to get that criminal off my back.
Rosa Parks' hero, she describes as Malcolm X. She very much, she loved, she admired, she had tremendous admiration for King, but she describes Malcolm X as her personal hero. Rosa Parks was a lifelong believer in self-defense. Obviously, she gets that from her grandfather. In many ways, Malcolm X reminds her of her grandfather. Malcolm X's willingness to sort of talk about sort of Northern liberalism and Northern hypocrisy. Malcolm X's very early opposition to the war in Vietnam. All of these things are very similar to her sort of political outlook, and therefore I think she very much looks to him.
That's interesting.
When I came back from Africa in 1958, I was research director of an African heritage exposition at the World's Trade Show building then on 8th Avenue. Malcolm X would come in sometime twice a day, sometime once a day, to see how the exhibition was getting along. And then about the second visit, he noticed me, and we began to talk. And when he discovered my proficiency in history, which is something I've taught most of my adult life, he began to ask me questions about history. And later on, when he started making speeches on history, he asked me to compile folders on different aspects of history.
The Muslims who follow the Honorable Elijah Muhammad don't see any way in which the so-called Emancipation Proclamation that Lincoln allegedly made 100 years ago has freed our people or has done anything good for our people.
Our friendship began around information. And Malcolm X had something most people don't seem to be aware of, is a shadow non-Muslim cabinet. I was in the history cabinet. Another person was in the political science cabinet. Another one for sociology. One of the things that made Malcolm X so devastatingly effective is his pursuit of information wherever he could find it. And he did not assume that the Muslims had it. He went outside and got it. But he did not become less a Muslim.
The party that you backed controls 2/3 of the House of Representatives and the Senate, and still they can't keep their promise to you because you're a chump. Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Looking at the life of Malcolm X, I'm quoting John Killens, who said about men of Malcolm's breed, he was a delicated patriarch. Dignity was his country. Manhood was his government. freedom was his land. Thank you.
Just one step farther to see am I justified in this stand. And I say, I'm speaking as a black man from America, which is a racist society. No matter how much you hear it talk about democracy, it's as racist as South Africa, or as racist as Portugal, or as racist as any other racialist society on this earth. The only difference between it and South Africa preaches separation and practices separation. America preaches integration and practices segregation. This is the only difference. They don't practice what they preach. Whereas South Africa preaches and practices the same thing. I have more respect for a man who lets me know where he stands, even if he's wrong, than the one who comes up like an angel and is nothing but a devil.
Malcolm moved closer toward the civil rights movement after his return from Mecca.
Absolutely.
And the civil rights movement moved closer to Malcolm, with black identity becoming a part of the civil rights struggle. So the mainstream of the United States civil rights struggle today is part integrationist and part black identity and Afrocentrism, if you will.
Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were about to join forces and form a coalition. I saw Malcolm X speak in Selma, Alabama on February 4, 1965. He was ready to join the civil rights movement. He spoke at Brown's Chapel. He met with Coretta King and Andy Young that day. He came to support King's movement, but King was in jail and could not meet with him. The week before Malcolm died, Clarence Jones had dinner with him in New York City. They agreed on an agenda where King and Malcolm would come together. They agreed to disagree about self-defense, which was still a point of difference between them. But Malcolm X was going to organize the northern cities, and Martin Luther King was going to continue organizing in the South. And those two guys coming together in the winter of 1965 had to be J. Edgar Hoover's worst nightmare.
I'm not out to fight other Negro leaders or other Negro organizations. We must find a common approach, a common solution to a common problem. As of this minute, I have forgotten everything bad that the other leaders have said about me, and I pray they can also forget the many bad said about them. The problem facing our people here in America is bigger than all the other personal or organizational differences. Therefore, as leaders, we must stop worrying about the threat that we seem to think we pose to each other's personal prestige and concentrate our united efforts toward solving the unending hurt that is being done daily to our people here in America.
Sir, you seem to interchange the term white liberal with hypocritical politician. I don't believe this is true. I don't believe that our white liberals are in office. They are, by the way, investigated.
Question, please.
I just wondered why you interchange these terms when they're so evidently not interchangeable.
Historically, in America, the white liberal has been the one always supposedly who had the solution to the race problem. An example, the leading white liberal in American history was supposed to be Abraham Lincoln. He's the one who has been dangled in front of our people as a god who brought us out of slavery into the promised land of freedom. Martin Luther King last year was begging President Kennedy to issue another Emancipation Proclamation. If the Emancipation Proclamation of Abraham Lincoln was authentic and produced the result that it was supposed to, and if it had been sincere, it would have gotten results, then Martin Luther King wouldn't have to be begging for another proclamation and emancipation today. Another time, the white liberals supposedly fought the Civil War to free the slaves, and our people are still slaves, still begging for freedom. Some more white liberals came along with the so-called 13th, 14th, 15th, and other amendments to the Constitution, supposedly to solve our problem. The Constitution has been amended, and the problem is still here. 9 white liberals on the Supreme Court bench came up with a desegregation decision in 1954, supposedly to desegregate the schools, and the schools haven't been desegregated yet. Kennedy ran on a platform as a white liberal 3 years ago and said all he had to do was take out his fountain pen and put his name on some paper, and our problem would be solved. And it was 3 years in office before he found where his fountain pen was, and the problem isn't solved yet.
As Brother Malcolm said, we declare our right on this earth to be a man, to be a human being, to be given the rights of a human being, to be respected as a human being in this society, on this earth, in this day, which we intended to bring into existence.
By any means necessary.
Malcolm, I mean, good God, we just don't have a language for that brother. He's black music in motion. He's jazz enacted and embodied in that sense. And as he grew, he's John Coltrane's love is supreme at the core. He starts not loving white folk enough, but he grows, he matures. But his intensity, his authenticity, his sincerity in telling the truth and exposing lies and bearing witness is, I think, in many ways unprecedented. And he begins as a gangster. He's Malcolm Little. He's loved by Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X. And then he takes on the world with his love, with his willingness to live, his willingness to die for struggle for the people.
There's a worldwide revolution going on.
In my opinion, the young generation of white, black, brown, whatever else there is, you're living at a time of extremism, a time of revolution.
What is it revolting against? The power structure. The American power structure? No. The French power structure? No. The English power structure? No. Then what power structure? An international Western power structure.
And I, for one, will join in with anyone, don't care what color you are, as long as you want to change this miserable condition that exists on this earth.
On my way to Bootsy Bello, where hell